أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And welcome to another episode of Islamic Jurisprudence, where we delve deeper into the whats and whys of Muslim life in modern day society. Joining me on the panel today, we have Kashif Virgsab and Shahzad Ahmed Sab, missionaries of the MTA Muslim community. In previous programs, we have talked about the concept of jurisprudence, the process of marriage, and the upbringing of children, amongst other things. On today's show, we will be looking at the concept of the veil. Why is it so important for Muslims? How does it form part of our identity? And how essential is it in the day today? Let's have a little look at the topic.
In this day and age, we hear many Islamic terminologies such as jihad, burqa, or the Sharia that are certainly no longer foreign here in the West. Yet still, there remains a large number of people unaware of the true meaning and significance of these concepts in Islam. One such concept is the observance of hijab. The sad reality is that for many non-Muslims, it is seen as a practice applicable to women only and considered to be both oppressive and degrading. The hijab in actuality is more than just the simple covering of oneself, and its observance is enjoined equally upon both men and women. The underlying principle in regards to hijab is modesty. Modesty not just limited to one's clothing, but in essence reflected from within, affecting one's inner purity and safeguarding one's chastity and dignity. With the recent and widely covered outbreak of scandals of power abuse and sexual misconduct, the need for the observance of the Islamic injunction of hijab and parda for both men and women becomes ever more important. In the Holy Quran, God Almighty lays down the following commandment to men first. Say to the believing men that they restrain their eyes and guard their private parts. That is purer for them. Surely Allah is well aware of what they do. It is only after having commanded men to restrain their eyes from looking at other women that it then instructs the women to do the same. Moreover, as an extra form of protecting the honor and dignity of women from men who fail to restrain their lustful glances, the Holy Quran further then commands women to not openly disclose their beauty. Some in the modern day have misrepresented this beautiful teaching of Islam, and in some places have violated the very basic human rights of women in their choice of what to wear, where to work, or the chance to acquire an education. This is completely contrary to the true teachings of Islam and the true dignity and honor of women that Islam establishes in society. In today's program, we shall explore the true Islamic concept of hijab, its importance in relation to both men and women, and its need and application in modern-day society in light of Islamic jurisprudence.
So obviously a very interesting look at the concept of the hijab, or the veil as it's commonly called. Now, Shahzad, I think the main question that needs to be asked is, of course the veil is spoken a lot about in the media, it's a big thing and a part of the Muslim identity as such, but why is the veil so important for Muslims?
So Mansoor, the concept of the veil or hijab or parda is something that is misunderstood, greatly misunderstood, but not just non-Muslims, but also Muslims as well. And sometimes it's limited only to a piece of clothing.
Right.
And it's only to be applicable for women only. In fact, the concept of and the injunction of the hijab and parda, which we find in the Holy Quran, and in the from the practice of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and his companions, we find that it's actually a lifestyle. It is to adopt a certain lifestyle, and that is to adopt humility and modesty and piety within. And in view of this, Islam has placed certain safeguards as well to restrict and put some restraints of the the opposite sex is freely intermingling, because that leads to many ills and vices that are prevalent in society. And this is something that we don't need to just sort of hypothetically say that by putting these restraints, we safeguard ourselves from certain ills. In fact, as we come to the end of the year, a very reputable paper in a journalist actually said that perhaps this year will be better remembered for the hashtag campaign that started with the hashtag, of Me Too campaign, when many women came out and said that they had been victims or had fallen prey of some sort of abuse or sexual harassment.
Indeed.
And in fact, some of the figures that they revealed were shocking, in which they said that just one of them, if I was to share, was say that the 15 million girls from around the world between the ages of 15 and 19 reported of having some sort of harassment or fallen prey to some sort of abuse. So society in itself is telling us that these safeguards need to be placed. So this is the importance of the parda, which inshallah we will discuss throughout the program today.
Indeed, Jazakallah Shahzad Sahab. Kashif Sahab, looking at the concept of the parda, we understand that it's an integral part not only of a Muslim's identity, as we've already discussed and we've heard on the video as well, but also a very important part within society, and the ramifications or the negative ramifications of not having that can be seen, as Shahzad Sahab has very eloquently explained. But Kashif Sahab, where does the actual injunction for the concept of parda come from? And is it something which is compulsory on Muslims, or is it simply optional?
Well, we see in different cultures of the world, there is the veil is existent, and it is a sign of devotion and a sign of identity of a believing woman.
I see.
And Islam has adopted this injunction, as Shahzad very eloquently put it, that it is a sign of modesty and it stands to safeguard the chastity of the society. So in the Holy Quran, where it is mentioned, we saw in the VT as well, that the verse specifically speaks of certain aspects that has to be inculcated. The habit of controlling one's gazes, that they should not wander about freely, that we should protect our private parts and senses, as to say, with which we take into things from society and into our mind to keep our mind pure. Sure. And the Holy Quran says that this will lead to a purer mind and purer thoughts, and also a society where morality plays a high role. And it further says regarding women that they should use this hijab or veil as a covering from their heads down to over their bosoms. Now this is a religious injunction, just as salat is a religious injunction, and all believing women can be, we can expect that they follow it with devotion. So of course God Almighty has enjoined this very belief and very this thing, yes, which they therefore follow with devotion.
I think it's also important to remember that many people have raised the allegation perhaps that women are being forced to wear the hijab or the veil, which of course no one can force another individual to do anything. This is against the very basic human rights. The point being made here though is when an individual, and indeed the Holy Quran itself says la ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion. Everyone is free to believe in Islam or not believe in Islam. But once we become part of an organization or become part of a religion in this sense, it then becomes incumbent upon us to then follow the rules and regulations of that organization. In this case, the rules of parda. As you said, the rules of salat, the rules of fasting, all of them are in the same ballpark, as it were. Having said that, Shahzad Sahab, keeping this in mind, many people have also raised the allegation that the concept of parda is only restricted to women, and this is something which is used to perhaps keep women maintained in a certain way, and in fact the men are completely exempt from this law or from this teaching. I mean, to what extent is that true?
So Mr. Kashif just explained some of those in detail in light of the Quranic teachings, those safeguards that Islam has placed. And one of them that he mentioned was to lower one's gaze. This is the first and foremost injunction that is given in regards to parda. And interestingly, this injunction is given to men first. The Holy Quran says that كُلِّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّونَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. It addresses the men first to lower their gaze, and then the instruction is for the women. And then as an extra sort of protection, it the injunction is for the women to wear, looser clothes, a modest dress code as well. So the injunction of parda, the first and foremost injunction, actually is for men first and then for women. And also on the point of lowering one's gaze, the Promised Messiah ﷺ has mentioned this in his writings as well, and has said that Islam does not take a superficial view of the ills in society and how to rectify them.
Sure.
And it tackles the root of the problem. And the gaze and looking at the opposite gender, these are the precursors which lead to these ills. So Islam tackles the problem right from its root. It's not to say that everyone who looks at the opposite gender will commit some sort of ill act. But these are the precursors which Islam identifies and tells us to refrain from them, to safeguard and uphold the honor and purity and chastity of the society as a whole.
It's a very similar point. I mean, if in a shop it says no shoplifting, it's not to say that every single person that's coming in is a potential shoplifter. It's to deter the people that have that chain of thought themselves. And also, I think a very important point that you mentioned is those societal ills. That Islam, having understood that these are problems in society, there are people that despite being told that murder is wrong and rape is wrong and this is wrong and that is wrong, even despite that, their brains still work in the same way. And it's to take that possibility of those negative events and those negative occurrences away, why it tells both men and women to safeguard themselves and to stay as much as they can away from the possibility of anything occurring.
Actually, in the Holy Quran, this is supporting this view when it refers to parda or the hijab. In the very verse after, it says that وَالَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ, that there are certain people in society who carry an illness in their heart, meaning that they will look with ill intent on women or the opposite sex, and they can be harmful. So, as you said, they exist in every society, but Islam does not blame each and everybody. Rather, it is a deterrent from that happening, because Islam regards chastity as a very high moral quality.
And so, is it simply a psychological thing on men? I mean, is there any physical restrictions on men? So, for example, women have been told, as Kashfa Sahib has already explained, to cover certain parts of their body. Is there anything similar for men?
The Holy Prophet ﷺ has said that al-hayā min al-iman, that piety and modesty is part of our faith. And piety and modesty is not something that is just to be adopted within. But once it's adopted within, it then manifests in your external aspects as well.
Sure.
And so naturally one who is modest will not be wearing sort of revealing and tight clothes. And that applies both to men and women as well. So even for men, their lifestyle, the way they go about in life, their dress code, the way they behave, the way they talk, they will adopt modesty in everything. So yes, it's not just limited to lowering one's gaze for men only, but the adopting the attribute of modesty will then reflect in every action of theirs.
I see. Kashfa, I mean, when we're talking about the concept of the veil or the hijab, there are so many different terms that come to light. We have the niqab, the hijab, the veil, the scarf, the dupatta, the burqa. There's so many different names. I mean, what is the reality behind all of these different names? And is there a right and wrong?
Well, the Holy Quran refers to the hijab or veil with two words. One is khumr and the other is jilbab.
Okay.
And both of these cover the head and parts of the body. And now these new terms, abaya, hijab, they are rather cultural adaptation towards the Islamic law of hijab. The key injunction in the Holy Quran is that the head covering should go over or around the face, over the bosom. Now this can have different varieties. It is not prescribed in a certain manner.
Right.
And our khulafa have mentioned specifically that especially women who work and have professions can use the hijab which we see, which covers the hair and the ears down the neck and the bosom. But in certain cultures there are other forms of hijab which cover more parts of the face. So there is flexibility in this injunction. But the minimum is to cover your hair, cover your ears, and cover your bosom.
I see.
Yes.
And Shazad, I mean, following on from that, there are many variations around the world of wearing the hijab or the niqab, or as you already mentioned, the specific terms in the Holy Quran. But despite this variation in different countries and different cultures, it still seems that the hijab in the broad use of the word, or the veil, seems to be an incredibly contentious topic. I mean, why is that, and what do we answer to those people who allege against it?
Absolutely, and particularly so here in the West. And one of those those who critique this concept or the practice of wearing the veil, it's said that it's an infringement of one's human rights. This is one argument that is put forth. But as you, Mansoor, just mentioned in the beginning of the program, that there is no compulsion in religion. And so the Muslim women who wish to be a part of Islam and freely want to practice these injunctions, they see the good in these injunctions, and they want to practice that. What about their rights? What about allowing them to express their religion and take on that identity as well? So you cannot, in the name of freedom, take someone else's freedom away. So there's many other aspects of this to answer this as well. I mean, others sometimes will say that by observing the veil, women will not be able to integrate into society. But we see that within the Jamaat is the complete total opposite of that. That's an example that we can give, that the women within our community are very much part of society and play a very active and constructive role. And if anything, that safeguard actually allows them, empowers them and allows them to thrive within the society. Some of the facts and figures that we were discussing at the beginning of the program, in which so many cases have come, the veil in fact is a safeguard to allow them to work in that environment and thrive.
Indeed. And we'll come on to how the hijab is actually a proponent of women's rights in a little while and a little bit later on in the show as well. Kashif, yes?
Another reason for it becoming controversial is that in some countries where religion and state is intermixed, they've made this injunction as a law of the country.
Right.
And that is a form of oppression which the Holy Quran does not allow, in fact. You should not mix religion with state. So when you enforce hijab on women, that is when it becomes, oppressive, a tool of oppression. And we should also remember that the Western feminism, which started as a movement when women started to gain their rights,
Yes.
one of these rights were this more loose clothing or taking off the head covering. So that has become an integral part of the fight for women in the Western world to attain liberty. And one could say that this liberty in reality means that women should become more like men, and that is the liberty for women. Well, whereas Islam says that Islam establishes the right of women to be as women and have their rights and have their freedoms and have their fully right to follow the devotion and their conviction.
I think it very much boils down to the simple fact that no one has the right to dictate what another person wears or doesn't wear, as long as it's within the confines of morality. So we're not talking about uncovering the whole body where there's children around or there's other people around. Within the realms of modesty and morality, one cannot enforce the rules of anything upon someone else. Neither Muslims are saying that we want every woman in the world to wear the hijab, but equally, non-Muslims in the world cannot be forcing Muslim women to take off their hijabs because it's their fundamental human right.
And I think the issue is sometimes with just the concept having a connotation with Islam. Sometimes it's just done for the sake of that. I mean, if we look here in the West, when it's at the time of winter, we're going through winter now, you will see many people in their Western dressing as well, wearing long coats and scarves to protect themselves from the harsh weather. But if the same person then wears that as an injunction of Islam to protect themselves from society, it's frowned upon.
Even devoted nuns within Christianity are portrayed as very devoted and honorable ladies, but still that doesn't apply to Islam, it seems.
It's also very interesting to see how this is a very postmodern accusation and allegation. I mean, 100 years ago, it was common sight for women to be dressed in modesty. And I think it's interesting to ask people that would they walk around on the street completely naked in front of their friends and family and going to the supermarket or going to work? And I would assume that the answer of the vast majority would be no, of course not. And so the point is, the hijab is a name, as you quite rightly say, which is given the connotation of being Islamic or being Muslim, but it's actually the name of the lifestyle of modesty, which many people, be they Muslim or not, already adopt in their day-to-day lives. It's just that we see that modesty to cover slightly more than what they see. And I think that's what it really boils down to. Shahzad, you were mentioning before about how the hijab is the symbol of oppression to some, but in reality is a proponent of women's rights. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, of course. So, Nuzul, as we said, that again, you mentioned, again referring to that verse of La ikraha fid din, that there is no compulsion in religion. So when someone who adopts the Islamic faith and wants to practice that injunction, see, we here are three men talking about the veil in reference to women observing parda and stuff, but we should also remember that women actually want to, those women who want to wear the veil, who want to practice this injunction. And on many programs on MTA, women have had their own programs in which they have spoken about this, that they want to, they feel confident, they feel empowered. What about their rights? And speaking of their choice and the fact that it gives them confidence within society to play an active role in this, our beloved Imam, Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen Ayyadullah Ta'ala bin Aziz, gave a very powerful example of this in one of his Friday sermons after the annual convention here in the UK, when he spoke about a journalist who at first was quite surprised at the fact that the men and women were segregated at the Jalsa Salana, the annual convention. But after the whole day spending it just in the ladies, she found herself to be very confident. She felt that she was free from the sort of mental anguish of men looking at her. So she was freely roaming around and felt very, very happy to be there, and realized for herself, once she experienced the concept of, or the broader concept of hijab, of segregation and parda. So for women, for Muslim women to practice this injunction is their basic human right, and no state or legislative body can interfere within that.
In fact, society is without a doubt calling for it. I mean,
Absolutely.
It doesn't take much of an in-depth glance at today's society, at the headlines of the papers or flicking through the channels of the news. I mean, the sexual accusations of sexual violence and sexual harassment are rife right now. I mean, there are so many people just in the past month or two. And if the viewers don't believe us, then by all means go home and research this and look it up online, and you can just see how many millions of people there are, not only just here in the UK, but around the world, or even here in London, that are suffering on a daily basis and are too scared to go out and say something about it.
And as a result, you'll hear things about having a women-only concert, or having a women-only train carriage, or hotels where the floor is only for women only.
So the need is definitely
there. The need
there.
is now, but Islam has identified that and established that 1400 years ago.
On that point, I know Kashta's coming in because, as far as I'm aware, this woman-only concert happened not too far away from yourself in Sweden.
Yes, it was brought up in Sweden. Now, Sweden is a society which is famous for being very equal, and the quality of equality is very much valued in Sweden. But still, there was this organizer who said that there was harassment on certain concerts, and Hazura just mentioned this as well. Right. Then she decided to have a women-only concert, and surprisingly, all the tickets sold out almost immediately, and it became very popular.
It is needed.
Yes, and which shows that women do appreciate that in certain instances there should be segregation, even in the secular society. We have locker rooms and toilets. Even in our sports activities, we segregate. And why is that? So that each gender can do their activities with greater freedom, and this is valued in each society. But still, the levels or the differences are there as well, which should be appreciated rather than suppressed.
Indeed. I think it's also maybe important for us to mention that although there are many circumstances when it's not needed that men and women are separated, when they're not needed to be together, they are encouraged to separate. But in situations where there is a need for men and women to be side by side, such as, for example, at work or in school or in other situations like this, then Islam does not prohibit that. Yes. It simply says, for the forwarding of a better and functioning society, when it's not needed, it's better to abstain from that situation, which could potentially have negative ramifications. Just following on from this, the question of shaking hands with the opposite sex is also a question which is often asked and often talked about. Could you shine some light on this? Is it permissible for men and women to shake hands with members of the opposite sex?
Yes, this became also very controversial in Sweden because this was, related to the element of equality. Whereas it doesn't say that only women cannot shake hands of men cannot shake hands of women even. And where does this stem from? It was actually the Holy Prophet ﷺ that once he was taking the Pledge of Allegiance from a group of ladies.
Sure.
And they said that we will do this allegiance on certain conditions, and here is our hands, please take our hands and take our bath. And the Holy Prophet said, there is no need to take in hands, because I do not shake the hands of women, but your pledge of allegiance, I will accept it. So from this, we Muslims inculcate this habit, and it is actually a sign of respect. It is seen as respectful, not even in Islam, even in some Jews practice this, that they do not shake hands with the opposite sex. And some do it due to hygiene, and other issues are there as well. They don't shake hands with even the same sex. But Islam enjoins this, in fact, to establish the dignity of both men and women. And as we spoke earlier, that there are some ways who lead to immorality. Islam wishes to close these doors and to establish the respect of each sex in this way.
Indeed. I mean, looking at this topic in general, it's a big topic, of course, and I think it would be a travesty for us not to mention some phenomenal women, both within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and indeed the wider Muslim community, who we would say despite wearing the hijab, but they would say because of the hijab, have gone forward through the heights of progress, and they are the leading people in their fields. I mean, we have scientists and researchers and teachers and politicians, people that are involved with economics. There are so many people who have worn the hijab and yet have shown and are living proof that the hijab has actually pushed them forward in progress rather than pulled them back.
Yes. And one example is the Nobel laureate Tawakkul Karman, who is from Yemen. And she won the Nobel Prize. And afterwards she was asked from a journalist regarding her hijab, why she wore it. And she said that as human beings evolved, initially they wore no clothes, and we regarded that society as uncivilized. But as the mankind became more and more civilized, they dressed up more and more. So she said that the dress I am wearing today represents the highest form of civilization. And that is actually what parda is. It is a sign of civilization. And we would say that our naked society is going in the opposite direction and becoming more uncivilized.
Indeed. And it's also quite interesting to see that the more respected the individual, generally speaking, in society, the more clothes they don, be it the Queen or the royal family, be it someone who's graduating from university, be it a mayor or a councillor, they put excess things on. And that is a sign of their respect, even if it be a member of the military. It's excess. It's more of an outward show of respect rather than taking the clothes off, which I think universally is seen as a show of disrespect. Jazakallah, Kashif Virk Saab and Shahzad Ahmed Saab, both from Rabian, of course. Thank you. It's always an honor to have you here on the panel. And Jazakallah to everyone at home for viewing. Don't forget to send in your questions, your comments and your queries to IJ, that's I for Islamic, J for Jurisprudence, at mta.tv, and we will do our best to get round to answering them. Again, Jazakallah for viewing, and till next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله